morning. Welcome to the Morning Momentum this beautiful Wednesday. Today being the 11th of October 2023. This is a daily compendium of local and international news, human interest stories, current affairs, and expert opinion. Let's take a look at the top stories making the headlines on the papers this morning. We start with the Daily Nation. Moi's last days. When former President Daniel Arap Moi started experiencing difficulty in walking in 2017, it sparked concern from his personal doctor, David Silverstein, and his family, and thus began the deterioration of Mzee's health that saw him flown to Israel for his final medical religious trip, then followed the ups and downs in his treatment journey, up until he breathed his last in February 2020. Read about this and more in the final installment of Heartbeat, an American cardiologist in Kenya. The story is beefed up for you on page 12 and page 13 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 4, how Ruto visit exposed soft underbelly of ODM rebels. President William Ruto's 4-day tour of Nyanza may have been a perfect opportunity for leaders who broke ranks with Azimio leader Raila Odinga to demonstrate that they were valuable team players in the head of state's side. But this wasn't the case, as they faced embarrassing moments in the presence of their guest. That story is beefed up for you on page 4. On page 6 and page 7, it's all about Utamaduni Day, First Lady in push for national dress. That story is beefed up for you on page 6 and page 7. Conflict, we've accounted for Kenyans in Israel. Now, the Diaspora Affairs Principal Secretary Roslyn Jogu says no Kenyan living or working in Israel has been hurt, even as the rocket battles continue in Gaza between Israeli forces and Hamas militant groups. That story is beefed up for you on page 10. On the cover page, it's all about weather. Give us El Nino cash in time, urge governors. The national government has been asked to release El Nino funds in good time to enable counties to prepare adequately to respond to emergencies that would be occasioned by the anticipated abnormal rainfalls. That story is beefed up for you on the cover page of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 2. Boost for Muranga as youth jobs trading project launch. Beneficiaries will receive a daily stipend of 400 shillings for 3 months. They will then be taken to TVET colleges and later given a seed capital. That story is beefed up for you on page 2. On page 3, life term. Court grants former Miss Langata a second appeal. Court rejected Ruth Kamande's previous claim of acting in self-defense. She's serving time for the murder of her boyfriend. Appellate Court wants Apex Court to address the plight of battered woman and applicable legal principles in self-defense. That story is beefed up for you on page 3. Let's take a look at page 4. ODM rebels get brutal reality check during Ruto tour. Now, Azimio leaders from Nyanza region had devised strategies to embarrass rebels in front of the president. They received lukewarm reception or were shouted down by crowds. That story is beefed up for you on page 4. On page 5, an ease over party elections sparks fierce battles in UDA. In Marsabit, MCAs want Ruto to curb external interference into matters concerning leadership of the assembly. That story is beefed up for you on page 5 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 6. First Lady in push for national dress to promote culture and patriotism. Ms. Ruto confirmed the government's commitment to promoting all forms of national and cultural expressions, including literature, the arts, traditional celebrations, science, communication, and information, together with the mass media. CS Kuria says it was a day to celebrate who we truly are, reflect on Kenya's achievements. That story is beefed up for you on page 6 and page 7 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 8. Your days are numbered. EACC tells bribe-loving traffic police. Anti-graft agency will rely on citizen whistleblowers to report on corrupt officers. EACC crackdown to dismantle corruption cartels within the traffic department of the National Police Service. Some good news on page 8. You want to catch up with that story this morning. Let's take a look at page 10. We've accounted for all Kenyans in Israel, says PS. The government has opened lines for distress calls. Diaspora Affairs PS says no Kenyan has been hurt or killed in the Israel-Palestine war. That story is beefed up for you on page 10. Let's take a look at page 12. Book serialization, Moi's last days and devastating loss of a close friend of 40 years. Moi's official birth date was September 2nd, 1924. However, talking to his contemporaries, my best estimate is that he was born between 1914 and 1918. He was well over 100 years old when he died. Those are sentiments by Moi's doctor who was taking care of him. You can catch up with that story on page 12 and page 13. Let's take a look at page 14. Growth in Kenya's aviation sector, focus on JKIA. JKIA, a triumph of transition. JKIA's success story extends far beyond its physical transformation. That story is beefed up for you on page 14 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's move on to expert opinion inside the Daily Nation. Let us leave no girl behind. Kenya must move beyond policy promises and reaffirmation of commitments. That story is beefed up for you on page 18. On page 19, let's reimagine food production. We must also diversify our production to cover crops such as soybeans and yellow maize. Those are sentiments by Joseph Choge, food security. Let's take a look at some other stories. For those who love motoring, you have the DN2 article as well inside the Daily Nation this morning. There is also the second Transport and Infrastructure Conference Expo, which is beefed up for you inside the Daily Nation this morning. Let's shift gears and take a look at county news. Now, ex-ministers ordered query in Mau Forest evictees case. Families fight for compensation, claiming they were kicked out illegally. Environment and Lands Court in Nakuru invited to determine legality of gazette notices. That story is beefed up for you on page 23. In Meru County, divisions emerge in camp opposing Mwangaza. Cracks have emerged among opponents of Meru Governor Kavira Mwangaza over the manner in which positions will be should they succeed in removing her from office. That story is beefed up for you on page 23. Briefly, in Nyamira County, doctors urged to embrace dialogue. Nyamira Governor Amos Nyaribo's bid to improve the health sector in the county has started bearing fruit, but some setbacks remain. In Tana River, fierce El Nino rains will cut off towns. Two key towns in Tana River County are at risk of being cut off by the anticipated El Nino floods as part of the road that was washed away by floods 5 years ago along the Mombasa-Garissa Highway in Bilbil area remains unrepaired. Also in Kilifi County, police investigate students' death. Those stories are beefed up for you on page 23. Let's take a look at page 24. Senate backs county's bid to disband water agencies. Now, lawmakers have supported calls by the governors to abolish WASREB and WRA. Water sector regulators accused of hampering provision of services. That story is beefed up for you on page 24 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at international news. 19 million Sudanese children out of school. Teachers in almost all states have not been paid since April when the war began. The global community urged to stand in solidarity with the suffering youngsters. That story is beefed up for you on page 26. In DRC Congo, clashes displaced 85,000. Clashes in Masisi territory of North Kivu province in DR Congo since October 1st have displaced nearly 85,000 people, bringing the total number of those uprooted from their homes in the province to more than 2 million. The UN humanitarian said this on Monday. In Windhoek, Namibia, do not restrict hunting. Namibia's Minister of Environment, Forestry and Tourism, Pohamba Shifeta, has expressed concern over the global trend of restricting hunting, highlighting the need to balance conservation with the welfare of communities. That story is beefed up for you on page 26 as well. Let's take a look at page 27 briefly. In Mongolia, President begins France visit. Mongolian President Uhana Hurelsug has begun a visit to France where he will discuss uranium mining. The visit, which ends on Saturday, follows a trip to Mongolia by French President Emmanuel Macron. Also in Yangon, 14,000 displaced by floods in Myanmar. Residents of Myanmar Bago City salvaged food in belongings from their waterlogged homes on Tuesday after record rainfall triggered floods that have displaced 14,000 people. Also in Afghan Kabul, a search for Afghan quick survivors on. Rescue workers scrabbled through rubble on Tuesday for villagers buried by earthquakes that killed more than 2,000 people in Afghanistan. In Riyadh, Amnesty criticizes bad work environment. Migrant workers in Amazon warehouse in Saudi Arabia suffer appalling conditions on the job safety risks and wage theft, Amnesty International said on Tuesday. That story is also beefed up for you on page 27. Lastly, concern as reporters killed in Gaza war. Lobbyists have expressed concern over reports that at least 6 journalists have been killed, injured, or gone missing in the conflict between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, which has claimed more than 2,500 lives. Iran not involved in Hamas raid on Israel. Khamenei says Gaza bloodbath. Israel appears likely to stage a ground assault on the city of 2.3 million. That story is beefed up for you on page 27 as well. Let's take a look at business news. Resolution Insurance caretaker overseeing extended. Resolution Insurance will remain under statutory management for at least 3 more months after the regulator applied for extension, which will see the underwriters' policy holders and creditors wait longer for their money. That story is beefed up for you on page 28. Banks in race for 10 billion KTDA factories financing. Tea agency banking on diversification to grow earnings. The agency invites bid to fund installation of specialty processing units in 32 plants. Briefly, in healthcare sector, Kenya to benefit from 149 billion shillings WB Health deal. Kenya is among countries set to benefit from $1 billion US credit and grant financing from a newly approved health emergency preparedness and response program. Let's take a look at sports news inside the Daily Nation this morning. And we start with athletics. Kiptum, I'm ready to race against Kipchoge. The new world marathon record holder also says he is also ready to represent Kenya at the 2024 Olympics. Government rewards freshly minted world marathon record holder with 5 million Kenya shillings. That story is beefed up for you on page 36. On page 37, remembering Sonny Liston, the former world champ with first of cannonballs. American boxer defied tough childhood and run-ins with police to become heavyweight champion of the world. Beyond his legendary fist that has no equal and has survived the test of time, it's amazing how he survived poverty to beat the world. That story is beefed up for you on page 37 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 38. Legend Diajana to Kenya. Track trials in France, a great idea. French hurdles legend urges Kenya to hold 2024 World Athletics Indoor Championship trials in southern France, meeting Miramas Metropole team willing to handle technical aspects of Kenyan trials. That story is beefed up for you on page 38. On page 39, dark clouds gather for Matano Juma. Sofapaka and Kenya Police have fired their coaches this season over poor performance. The coaches are living on borrowed time following a spate of poor results by Tusker and AFC Leopards. Bandari's Muhidin also on shaky ground. That story is beefed up for you on page 39. Let's take a look at the cover page of the Daily Nation this morning. Bill restricting foreigners to tenders over 20 billion vetoed. Lawmakers say raising the limit to 20 billion shillings is a jump too high. The National Assembly Committee's rejection of proposed law has thrown a lifeline to Chinese firms. In numbers, 500 million is the current limit of contract value below which foreign firms cannot bid. 886 billion shillings is the amount of money the Chinese government gave firms to boost overseas investments. Also, release El Nino funds to counties in good time, Governor urges. The National El Nino funds should be disbursed in good time, whether through governors or through county commissioners. Those are sentiments by Governor Mudhomi Njuki. And with that story of El Nino funds, we take a quick break and then we come back with the top stories inside the Standard this morning.
Imagine waking up to a show every morning that entertains, educates, that keeps you glued to the screen with interesting topics. Talk about health, fashion, business, fitness, and spiritual nourishment. Whether you're enjoying your cup of coffee, tea, milk, amaka uji, Younib Breakfast Show is the place to be. Every Tuesday and Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. with me, Penina Washara, here on Younib TV.
Welcome back to the Morning Momentum. If you are just joining us, you are still rolling with the host with the most. Alfonsoh is my name. You can keep interacting with us via our social media platforms at Younib_TV on Instagram, Younib Media TV on Facebook and YouTube. You can also interact with us via our SMS line 0719144144. Let's take a look at the top stories inside the Standard this morning. And the top story is facing Uhuru. Is it a Damascus moment? Now, after spending 5 years bashing his predecessor, the president and his deputy appear to have a change of mind and are heaping praises on a man they have loved to hate. What is afoot and why the change? That story is beefed up for you on page 6. And I want to quote some of the sentiments by President William Ruto and the Deputy President. President William Ruto said, "I must congratulate my predecessor, President Uhuru Kenyatta, for his foresight in coming up with this Kisumu shipyard refurbishment. to see what we are seeing here is phenomenal. Also, Rigathi Gachagua said, the elections are over. It is time to gather and unite our people. We have agreed that no leader will pelt former President Uhuru Kenyatta with stones because he is still our son. Well, more of that story is beefed up for you on page 6. NSSF's 2 billion Mia paper land goes up in smoke. That story is beefed up for you on page 2. Also about Utamaduni Day, it's a dash of color and splendor. That story is beefed up for you on page 3. On page 5, Azimio leader backs Ruto's move on ports. Raila Odinga says concession of key port services to improve efficiency is global best practice, but county leadership must be involved. Also on page 4, audit, the CA told to recover millions from senior teams. That story is beefed up for you on page 4. Let's take a look at page 2. NSSF loses 2 billion land payout after validity of title deeds questioned. Pensions body claims ownership of the land in Mlolongo that was acquired to construct a dual carriageway, but the court ruled that the titles of the prime land do not have known roots. That story is beefed up for you on page 2. Also on page 3, pomp and color at first Utamaduni Day festivals. First Lady Rachel Ruto says national government to support celebrations in 47 counties. The cultural PS says department to push for a national dress as an identity for Kenyans. That story is beefed up for you on page 3. Yesterday, during the event, the First Lady said, and I quote, "Let all Kenyans take the initiative to explore various cultures by visiting various counties and learn the ways of various communities." That story is beefed up for you on page 3. On page 4, more trouble for Chiloba as audit report flags cash paid to CA staff. Report recommends that senior CA staff refund allowances awarded irregularly. Now, the audit reveals managers have relatives working without conflict of interest declaration. That story is beefed up for you on page 4. Mary Wamboi, the CA board chairperson, said, and I quote, "The board is seized of the matter and I cannot discuss the same publicly because it's an active agenda at the board level and the contents are not only serious but also sensitive." Let's take a look at page 5. Raila backs Ruto decision on ports services. KPA has floated international tender to concession services in Mombasa and Lamu ports, but coast leaders have rejected plan, saying it is tantamount to selling key port services. That story is beefed up for you on page 5. Let's take a look at page 6. Facing Uhuru, Ruto Gashagua's about turn. Ruto embraces Uhuru's policies and praises him for foresight in shipyard refurbishment. Gachagua promises to protect Uhuru and forbids politicians from insulting him. That story is beefed up for you on page 6. You can get some more insights about that about turn by the government. Now, on page 8, tax summit, a great idea, but this is what it should focus on. There's need to look at tax policy and tax strategy as well as tax administration. The government should move from debt-inspired to growth-friendly taxation regime. That story is beefed up for you on page 8. In number 75% is the budget review on Outlook paper estimates the economy will grow in President Ruto's first term compared to Kibaki's 108% and Uhuru's 78%. All right, let's shift gears to page 10. Tough question as evictees wait verdict. Environment and Lands Court to give judgment on Mau Forest by early March. Forest border, validity of title deeds, and origin of occupants among issues to be decided. That story is beefed up for you on page 10. Let's take a look at the expert opinion inside the Standard this morning. Now, why leader of opposition office will not make much difference. One of the agenda items in the bipartisan talks is a proposal by Kenya Kwanza to create the office of the leader of opposition. While any proposal that strengthens our democracy is welcome, our lack of ideology-based parties questions how effective the office will be able to offer alternative policies. Well, you can catch up with that story on page 12. Let's take a look at page 14. Failure to fully implement laws standing in way of girls' rights. Kenya joins the global community today to mark yet another International Day of the Girl Child to celebrate her rights and recognize the unique challenges girls face. That story is beefed up for you on page 14. On page 16, teacher builds maize dryer that can store over 150 bags for 1 year. Innovation can dry maize at no cost, saving farmers time and resources. Farmers suffer rotting maize, theft and damage from rodents. Well, that story is beefed up for you on page 16. In Murang'a County, the county allocates 80 million shillings more for NHIF program. That story is beefed up for you on page 16. The Standard Enterprise article is also beefed up for you inside the Standard this morning. Let's shift gears and take a look at business news. No respite for borrowers as more banks hike loan rates. NCBA is the latest lender to hike its Kenya shilling-based lending rate, which will increase from 13% per annum to 14.5% per annum. The trend comes on the back of the government's increasing debt security sales, and that story is beefed up for you on page 17. Also in matters economy, experts stay upbeat on EAC outlook. Stanbic Bank last week held the inaugural East Africa Business Summit in Nairobi under the theme, The Case for Economic Optimism for East Africa. The event brought together business leaders and industry experts from across East Africa. That story is beefed up for you on page 17. On page 18, clean fuel. State to hand out free gas cylinders to poor households. The government plans to ring fence an 18% liter anti-adulteration levy collected on domestic kerosene. The cabinet has also proposed the removal of the taxes on locally manufactured cylinders. That story is beefed up for you on page 18. Let's take a look at the international news this morning. Stakes high as Liberians head to elections. Incumbent President George Weah is seeking re-election for a second 6-year term. Weah faces a contentious rematch with former Vice President Joseph Boakai of the main opposition Unity Party. That story is beefed up for you on page 19. Let's take a look at page 20. Israel hits Gaza as Hamas warns will kill hostages. Up to 150 hostages are being held in Gaza. This complicates the picture as Israel considers how to respond. That story is beefed up for you on page 20. Let's take a look at page 22. It's all about the Motor Digest for the motoring enthusiasts, how to keep your brake disc healthy and maintaining diesel fuel injectors. Also, what to expect in the Mahindra Scorpio N SUV. You can catch up with the article on page 22 and page 23 of the Standard this morning. Let's take a look at sports news inside the Standard, and we start with football. Will Kenya clear all hurdles and deliver stadiums in good time? That story is beefed up for you on page 32. Also, will All Blacks blow away Ireland in their quarters date? Ireland's Kelleher will treat World Cup quarterfinal like any other. The two rugby powerhouse meet in the last 8 on Saturday. That story is beefed up for you on page 29. Also, the Left Foot League, Jamhuri Bulls FC hit One Africa Logistics. The Jamhuri Bulls FC roared to an emphatic 8-3 victory over One Africa Logistics in a one-sided Left Foot Sports Social League fixture at Chic Union Club Astro Turf. 3 times New Zealand have won Women's Rugby World Cup. That story is beefed up for you on page 29. On page 30, It's all about tennis. Coco Gauff and Swiatek set to miss Billie Jean King Cup finals. The pair will miss the event due to their involvement in the WTA finals, and the 12-team tournament is set for November 7th in Seville. That story is beefed up for you on page 30. On page 31, Hazard finally calls it a day. Ex-Chelsea and Real Madrid winger has officially retired from football. The former Belgium captain won 2 EPL titles with Chelsea before joining Real Madrid in 2019. Real Madrid's Eden Hazard has now retired from football. And I want to quote, "During my career, I was lucky to meet great managers, coaches, and teammates. Thank you to everyone for these great times. I will miss you all." That story is beefed up for you on page 31. Also in matters football still, Firat hopeful on securing Daniel Anyembe's release. Harambee Stars head coach Engin Firat is optimistic of having Viborg FF right back Daniel Anyembe in the team ahead of Monday's friendly match against Russia in Antalya, Turkey. That story is also beefed up for you on page 31. On the cover page of the Standard this morning, will Kenya clear all hurdles and deliver stadiums in good time? The cabinet approved the facelift of Nyayo, Kasarani, and Kipchoge Keino Stadium to meet CAF standards. Kenya was last month awarded the rights to host 2027 AFCON with Tanzania and Uganda. That story is beefed up for you on page 32. Now, with that story of Kenya's stadiums, we come to an end of today's session of the Morning Momentum. Thank you so much for choosing to stay with Younib TV. I have been your host, Alfonsoh, and also by extension, many thanks to all those who made this broadcast a success, the Chief Controller, Anifa, Kavira. See you tomorrow, same time, same place. Until then, do have a beautiful Wednesday.